Hello again, I'm Norman Robinson, and welcome to Affordable Housing Matters. Tonight will be the continuation of our discussion detailing the Housing Trust Fund Ordinance. And the ordinance establishes the Housing Trust Fund's financial structure, which focuses on preserving and creating affordable housing. The Housing Trust Fund will go into effect if the ballot measure passes in the November election. Joining me again on set is our esteemed panel, New Orleans Council member for District B, Councilwoman Leslie Harris, and the CEO of the Finance New Orleans organization, Mr. Damon Burns. Welcome back.
Good to be back.
When last we talked, we were discussing what the ordinance does. Mm-hmm. Now let's talk about how it affects the individual who might be in a home that needs repairing, or the individual who might be looking for a home. I understand there's a need for 47,000 affordable housing units in the city of New Orleans. How does this go about tackling that?
Sure. So the way that, again, if people vote for the charter amendment, which I hope they do, not a new tax, it's a charter amendment that would take 2% of the city's budget and put it into a housing trust fund. We've identified 3 priority areas where that money would go to. The first is the creation of affordable and workforce rental housing, the maintenance of affordable and workforce rental housing, and the creation of home ownership opportunities and maintenance of home ownership. And so these 3 areas are where the funds will be dedicated and guided by Finance New Orleans and the New Orleans Redevelopment Authority with an advisory council as well. Mm-hmm. And they will come before the council 4 times a year with check-ins, and those check-ins will be public. So if we talk about the creation of affordable rental housing, we know that we need these 47,000 units. We're not talking about necessarily new builds up and down, but we are talking about rehabilitation of maybe a double, where someone, a homeowner, can purchase a home, live in one side, and rent out the other. So that goes to both home ownership and creation of affordable rental housing. As a person who lives in a community with a lot of blighted homes, we know that there are a lot of homeowners who have houses that are falling into disrepair because they cannot make critical repairs. So this housing trust fund can assist with those critical repairs so that they can get their homes to safe and livable condition, get insurance, and make sure that their neighbors can also get insurance. So this up and down the board impacts homeownership and renters in New Orleans.
Mm-hmm. And you guys, as the, I guess, managers, mm-hmm. would determine who gets what, Mr. Burns?
Well, we have
how that works?
Yes, we have programs. So I won't get into the Redevelopment Authority's programs because I'm just not as educated as Brenda would be on it, but they have programs mainly for developers, and they have also home rehabilitation programs that they're currently offering, and the trust fund would help to boost. As I said in the previous show, it's going to help to boost those programs. It's going to give more force, more opportunity, because they're just going to have more capital available to develop more property, to invest in developers, to acquire land, to manage land. They're just going to have more resources to do it. And then on Finance New Orleans' side, we have financing programs for home buyers. We have financing programs for developers as well. And what this Housing Trust Fund is going to do, the part that we're going to manage, is going to enable us to invest in more down payment assistance programs. It's also going to enable us to invest in more retrofitting of homes. There are a lot of families that don't want to move. They mm-hmm. just want to update and refreshen where they are. Mm-hmm. But there aren't a lot of programs available, particularly through private banks, in order for families to do it. So we have programs that enable them to do those kind of things. And then we also have programs for developers who want to build affordable housing units. And those developers often need equity capital from the public sector in order to make those projects work. And the Housing Trust Fund gives us more resources to do more development projects. And lastly, I'll say for the individual that may not be doing any of those things, the benefit for them is a general community improvement. Mm-hmm. So we're able to clean up our neighborhoods, invest more in our neighborhoods, particularly in target areas that are pointed out in the Housing Ecosystem Master Plan. Mm-hmm. Target areas that are not getting the kind of investment that they need or that we would like to see. And the kind of projects, aspirational projects that we talked about for a long time, we've been talking about for decades, we can start to bring those things to life. And you have a lot of creative developers out there that are local. We're attracting developers from other parts of the country as well that want to do deals here, that want to do projects. So this is a chance for us to make an overall community investment and community improvement. So even if you're on buying a home or fixing up a home or developing a project, this is good investment for the city of New Orleans, which can improve your surrounding area. It can improve your property value as well, because now those homes that were blighted, they aren't sitting there anymore. Now that multifamily structure or that raw land that hadn't been developed in decades, now we have a chance to start putting those pieces of land in action.
So let's visualize this scenario. I'm a homeowner, and no, let's just say I'm a renter, and the place where I live is falling apart.
Yep.
It's falling apart, and I can't get the landlord to do a damn thing about it. You know, like take the Willows apartment complex, for example, where there's mold all over the place. There are holes in the ceiling. You know, there are rats, and there's feces from the sewer lines. How does this program help me?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, when we talk about redeveloping properties and rebuilding properties or building properties, getting more rental units into the market means that people have a choice, that they're not tied to an apartment at the Willows that's falling apart. So they have a choice to move from there to a new development or a rehabilitated development as a renter. The other thing is, if you're a small landlord, and I'm not talking about the Willows landlord who was a slumlord, but if you are a small landlord, Nora has programs for small landlords to rehabilitate their rental properties so that they can provide safe, affordable rental housing. So that means that these units that may just need some modernization, that may need weatherization, or mold remediation, small landlords can tap into these funds in order to do that, to provide their tenants with safe, affordable housing. We know that there are a lot of landlords in New Orleans and a lot of good-hearted landlords who are not raising their rent despite market pressures. To have a fund that they can tap into to make critical repairs to their properties so that their tenants can live, again, safe and healthily is really important, and something that this fund can fund.
When you say affordable housing, are we talking mostly to the people who are burden costs because of rents being astronomical, or are we talking mostly to people who want to buy homes or improve the homes they're living in?
It's a mix. It's a mixture of the two, and some other areas as well. One of the things that Councilwoman Harris pointed out earlier is that there's going to be an allocation process and a prioritization of the housing trust funds. So that's part of the governance. So in other words, Nora and Finance New Orleans aren't able to just, we don't have the authority to just take the money and do whatever we want with it. There's some checks and balances. We have to report back. So we're always working on internal strategies of how much of our resources that we're going to allocate to home ownership, how much are we going to allocate to rental. So that's an annual thing that we do. And normally it comes out to about a 50-50. We try to invest in both equally. But with the Housing Trust Fund, it'll be a new problem, a good problem, which is we have a lot more money to invest in home ownership or rental. What does the city really need at this moment? So that's going to be a bigger decision that is made by the governance, the governance organization of the Housing Trust Fund, and the co-managers, Nora and Finance New Orleans. So we'll make that decision collectively, but in general, we probably wouldn't want to go beyond a 60-40 split.
I got you.
Of the money, because you don't want to disinvest too much in one particular area, and that's frankly what has been happening in the past few years. Not necessarily to our that hasn't been our intent as city agencies, but all of the capital is flowing toward multifamily right now. And we aren't creating enough home ownership opportunities as a city, but as a country. Because in our country, the federal programs are mostly built around multifamily and affordable rental development, which is great, and they're great resources. But there's also a need for home ownership programs, and there just aren't enough home ownership development programs out there to help keep the balance. So the Housing Trust Fund at least will give us some local control over how much balance we have in rental versus home ownership.
Now, is there a process for categorizing which developers get how much of this money that's set aside for housing?
So that was the question that came up in an article I think that NOLA.com published about developers and city council being biased towards certain developers. The city council has no say in who gets the money, what developer gets the development funds. The city council will oversee the fund generally in the categories that are recommended, but we will not have a say in, okay, XYZ developer gets the amount of money. What typically happens, and Damon can talk more about this, and Brenda as well, is that a notice of funding opportunity is issued, and then people respond to that. And then they are ranked based on how they respond to that notice.
I want to let the viewers know who Brenda is, because you've mentioned her several times, and you know, she's the executive director of New Orleans Redevelopment Authority. She was scheduled to be here, but something came up and she was not able to be here.
And the other thing, Brenda is a longtime housing advocate, right?
Yes.
So let's put Brenda Bro in context. She's not only the head of NORA, but she is a longtime housing advocate and is someone who gets things done. We talked in the last segment about the Louisiana Firehouse development, which is a partnership between NORA, finance, private developers, and in fact a minority developer. As well as a banking institution. And so that really goes to show how the Housing Trust Fund money can be leveraged in order to get affordable units back into a blighted city building using NORA-owned property that will also have a child care center behind it. So that really is the exemplar of how we can use this money in order to creatively get units back online using NORA-owned property, using finance, money and acumen, as well as private investment.
So, the allocation process you talked about, how does that work, Mr. Burns?
Well, it starts with this internal budgeting that happens, but ultimately we have programs that we make available to the community, and typically our programs are, at least in home ownership space, first come, first serve. And that's how we've done it for decades. So when we have a pool of money available, we market it to the community, and we say based on who qualifies first, we'll allocate the money first. Allocating money to developers is a little bit different. There are some things that we can do on a first come, first serve basis. For example, we do property tax exemptions now. And at the moment, we leave it open because there's a big need for affordable housing. But you know, one day, maybe it's a problem that we don't want to give out any more tax exemptions, so we would change our method of allocating tax exemptions. But if there's a pool of gap funding, for example, that's going to be a more competitive process. So let me be more clear. When I say gap funding, developers need money from the city and city agencies in order to make their projects work. And so the city, NORA, some OCD, HANO, Finance New Orleans, typically will go through some kind of competitive process, a notice of funds available, or some kind of RFP or RFQ process, where developers respond and they apply with their best ideas. We score them, and we try to determine which ones are the best investments for the pool of money that we have. So that's typically how it happens with developers right now. Having the Housing Trust Fund gives us more capital to do more projects, and that creates more opportunities for developers. So there's just a limited amount of dollars available now. And a big issue too is capacity. So a dilemma that the city has and other agencies is that you have to invest in developers with track record. And you have to invest in developers that you know can get the deal done, because you don't want to mess up the deal with public money. And so sometimes it can be difficult to invest in emerging developers or developers doing their first projects, and that has historically been a problem. But I'm happy to say that in the past few years, we have seen more emerging developers get into these projects, be able to partner with larger developers that have the bigger track record, or even start to do deals on their own.
Who gets to certify these developers? Who gets to decide whether they're reputable or not?
Well, there's not a official certification process necessarily, but
So how do you know, as a managing agency, that they're okay?
One way we do it is there's a long checklist of things that developers have to do in order to get these projects approved. Many of them involve bringing banks to the table, bringing design firms, construction firms. They have to build a production team of people in order to make a project work. So we're last money in as a public agency. In other words, we want to see that the developer is able to pull everything together. They've passed underwriting at the bank. They've passed underwriting with their equity investors. They've been able to get a contractor to agree to do the deal with them. So if they can get all those things done, that in itself is a test. And so that long list of things that has to be done, we require all of the boxes to be checked before our board, before the public agency even signs off on it. And we also do some internal underwriting. We look at the numbers and make sure the project makes sense. We do that kind of stuff too. But it is a steep hill to climb to do a development project with public money. And that can be problematic too, as I said, with getting emerging developers integrated. But we have a lot of smart, young, talented people in New Orleans who are very eager about development. And this Housing Trust Fund will allow us to invest more in those emerging developers, and along with existing developers who are doing great projects, who have done great projects in New Orleans. We need them too. So we need a whole spectrum of entrepreneurs that are out there building projects, but it's going to be really hard if we don't have enough city money to support those deals.
How many of the developers or stakeholders did you have a discussion with about the Housing Trust Fund before you went ahead with this particular ordinance? And what was their reaction, and what was the challenge to convincing them?
Well, I don't think there's a lot to convince developers that this is a good thing. Even people who are opposed to the charter amendment say that there's a need for housing in the city of New Orleans. So the developers are acutely aware of the fact that there are challenges pulling down federal money to build affordable and workforce housing, that there's challenges to the state money that comes in as well, and that there is a need for a pool of money from the city in order to complete some of their projects. In fact, we as this current city council used ARPA funding, $32 million of ARPA funding, which is federal funding, for gap financing for projects that were already in a queue, for about 10 projects that were already in a queue, identified as being creating affordable and workforce housing, but that had a gap because the federal financing they had could not suffice to build because of inflation and taxes and insurance costs. So we've already allocated $32 million to fill the gap for those projects to get them going. So I think developers are excited about this program. What's more important to me is that the housing advocates are excited about this charter amendment, and people on the street, when I go and speak about this, because that's all I do right now, is talk about this program. When I talk about the charter amendment and the need for housing in New Orleans, everybody agrees. Everybody agrees that we need better housing for our people in New Orleans.
Without question, I can remember at least a couple of years ago when I was talking to a bunch of our culture bearers who had to move out of New Orleans because they couldn't afford to live here anymore. But my concern right now is the astronomical insurance rates.
Yeah.
How does the Housing Trust Fund remedy that particular issue?
So again, the three priority areas that we talked about: creation of affordable workforce housing, maintenance of affordable workforce rental housing, and maintenance and creation of homeownership opportunities. Those have to have dedicated funding under the effectuating ordinance, 15% in each of those three areas, which equates to about $2.1 million in each of those areas. There's 85% of the funding is flexible depending on the need du jour. So right now we know that we need investment in our housing infrastructure to weatherize it and to climate protect it through fortified roofing programs and other programs to make sure that our housing is safe and secure against climate issues, which is what causes the high rates of insurance. So Nora, Finance, and the Advisory Committee can decide to put 85% of the pool of money that is not already dedicated to the 3 priority areas into something like a fortified roof program to get people fortified roofs so that insurance prices come down for everyone in New Orleans, not just the people who have fortified roofs. Because we know that if our housing stock is climate resistant overall, or a bigger percentage of it, then we know that insurance prices should go down and that insurers should come back into the market.
Yeah. And the insurance companies are looking at us like a portfolio. They look at the city as one portfolio and the surrounding area, and then we're also connected to other coastal areas in terms of how they're grading our risks. So one way that the Housing Trust Fund will help is, first of all, we have standards. We have sustainability standards or green standards for all of the multifamily projects that are being developed. Nora, Hano, the city, we all have the same standards. They're called Enterprise Green Community Standards. There are other types of standards too, but the bottom line is developers have to meet those guidelines when building housing. We even have a green mortgage program that requires homeowners to also meet certain standards.
What does that mean, green mortgage?
Green mortgage means it's a mortgage that helps somebody get into the home like it normally does, or it helps somebody acquire a home, but also it comes with a budget to help the family make the home more sustainable or weatherize the home so they can get a fortified roof, they can get a stormwater management system, they can get renewable energy and backup storage if they can afford that. Those are the things that can be done with a green mortgage. So the bottom line is with the insurance companies is that we've had conversations with different types of insurance companies, and what they want to know is what kind of preventative measures are we taking as a city so that they could give us better rates, or we can start driving down the cost. So every house that we can do and fortify, every roof that we can fortify across the city, it matters to the whole portfolio, is all I'm saying. So there's nothing we can do about our geography, but there are things that we can start doing to mitigate our insurance costs, like let's raise homes.
Yes.
Let's build fortified roofing. We don't have money to do all those things right now though, but the Housing Trust Fund will give us capital so that when you do get a green mortgage, perhaps we can look at raising a home too. We can also look at the developers just building the homes raised from the jump.
Is that something that you're considering right now?
Yes.
A serious consideration? Because I've always thought that it made sense to have raised homes in an area that is, historically likely to flood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So is that something that's going to be recommended, or something that's going to be?
Yeah, it's been recommended. I know it's a part of the city's hazard mitigation plan. It's always been a strategy, but there just isn't a lot of money to raise individual homes.
Yeah.
A lot of that requires public investment, and that's what the Housing Trust
Is that
Fund
going to be part of the criteria under the Housing Trust Fund?
Well, it's part of what we can look at right now, right? And again, it's based on what is happening at the moment, and that's why the fund is flexible. So we're not going to just say, okay, this funding is just going to be used for fortified roofs going forward for the next 10, 20 years. If we can fortify a lot of roofs in the next 5 years, then that money can then be used for something else, whatever the economy calls for at the time. That's why having a charter amendment is so important, because it outlives whatever politicians in office right now to address the needs of the day. So 10 years from now, who knows what we'll need? Maybe we have weatherized all of our houses and our insurance prices have gone down, but now that money can be used for something else in the affordable and workforce space.
So how important then is it going forward to really focus on making this city sort of climate friendly?
Yeah.
Because Mother Nature wins.
All the time.
All the time. Mother Nature never loses. So is there some part of this Housing Trust Fund that speaks to that we can rely on being sustainable?
Yeah. I just want to tell a short story.
Go ahead.
Quickly. I was at a community event last year for a group called Waterwise. It's a local community. And there was a gentleman there from Amsterdam.
Oh, yeah.
And I guess he was in town visiting, maybe he was with one of the organizations, but at any rate, he stood up and he said to the audience, he said, I live in Amsterdam and I live 12 feet below sea level. He said, but I sleep like a baby at night. And we have a worse geographic location than you do here in New Orleans. So the point he was making was, you can do it. We've done it, there's solutions out there, you just have to make the internal investment. So what I'm saying is that the investment that we need to make in weatherizing New Orleans, we don't have that allocation right now. That money is not coming from the federal government to the extent that we need it to. There is some money that's coming from the federal government for weatherization, for renewable energy, and we're working to get some of that capital, but that's a one-time investment. It is not a long-term recurring investment, and it's going to take some ongoing experimentation and shifting of priorities, and as we succeed in some areas, then we can reallocate the resources to other areas, but it is going to take a long-term recurring investment like a housing trust fund or some other kind of tax. I know we don't want a new tax, but it's going to take some kind of dedicated revenue stream so that we can simply put weatherize New Orleans or make New Orleans climate friendly.
Okay, so we got a minute left, Councilwoman Harris, so if you wouldn't mind just reintroducing us to the Housing Trust Fund and tell us why citizens should vote for it.
Sure. So it's a charter amendment on the November ballot. If you've early voted, please vote for Charter Amendment number 1. It's number 1 on the ballot. It would dedicate 2% of existing money, no new tax, into affordable and workforce housing in the city of New Orleans, growing our economy, making sure our population can stay within New Orleans. It's important that people vote for it. It's a reinvestment in ourselves.
Yeah, and hopefully, you know, after discussing this for the past 10 years, we'll see something positive take place as it relates to affordable housing.
Absolutely.
All right, well, thank you both for being here.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Leslie Harris and Damon Burns, CEO of Finance New Orleans. That will conclude our second episode, our 2-episode series focusing on the Housing Trust Fund ordinance. And for more information on this topic, please visit YestonolaHousing.com. And I'm Norman Robinson, and we will see you next time on Affordable Housing Matters.